Our series begins with an officer named David traveling on a train with his 2 children, closely observing everything around him with the eye of a policeman. He notices someone on the platform putting something in the trash while looking around suspiciously, sensing that something is amiss. At one point, when he sees the train security knocking on the bathroom door on someone who entered and hasn't come out for a long time, David asks a passenger next to him to keep an eye on his children until he returns. He then goes to talk with the train security, introduces himself as a sergeant from the Metropolitan Police, shows his ID card, and asks about the situation. She tells him that the British Transport Police have a warning about a potential suicide bomber planning to board a London train, and they have orders to stop the train at an abandoned station, but they still have 7 minutes before reaching the station. David records Sandra's number and promises to help her with the mission to safely stop the train. David heads to the bathroom and tries to open the door but cannot. He calls Sandra on the phone and tells her that the passengers are in danger, including children and his own sons among them. She asks him to lock all the exit doors because they cannot stop the train, as the terrorist would realize they have discovered him, and then he would detonate the train. Suddenly, the bathroom door opens, and the person inside comes out, surprising David as the individual is just a normal person not holding any device. The stranger moves inside the train, and David describes to Sandra what happened and tells her he is heading to the front of the train. David enters the bathroom to search for the device. Meanwhile, the police gather at the station of the abandoned train to prepare for the train's arrival. As soon as David enters the bathroom, he is shocked to find a veiled girl inside, wrapped in an explosive belt and holding the detonator in her hand, trembling and scared. He tries to calm her down so she does not press the button, pleads with her not to press it, and she collapses crying. David tells her that he will try to help her and that the counterterrorism unit is aware of the terrorist operation, and all he can offer her is to tell them that she is ready to talk to them. David calls Sandra, asking her to evacuate the train and contact the counterterrorism unit to tell them they found someone in the bathroom who is ready to surrender and talk. He also requests Sandra to ensure that the soldiers do not storm the train and that the priority is negotiation, not violence. David ensures all passengers have moved away, then returns to talk to Nadia, asking her about her name and why she is doing this. He learns that her husband forced her into it. David promises her that he will protect her from her husband and save her. He tells her that he is also scared because he has 2 children, shows her their pictures on his phone, and tells her about his daughter Ayla, aged 10, and Charlie, aged 8, wishing nothing more at that moment than for them to return safely to their mother. As soon as the train starts entering the station, Nadia becomes tense, tries to close the bathroom door. David attempts to speak with her, telling her that he has been to wars before and they tried to brainwash him just like they did to her, and that politicians are liars. They are the reason for these wars. The soldiers storm the train, and David tries to reassure Nadia, telling her that he will not move from his spot and will not let them harm her, and that they will only clear the train of passengers. The soldiers reach the bathroom and ask David to step aside, but he refuses to leave Nadia. The sniper, who is standing far away, cannot target Nadia, and David slowly brings Nadia out of the bathroom. The bomb disposal expert enters and carefully removes the belt, with Nadia showing extreme fear. David fulfills his promise to Nadia and saves her, but the police take her away. Nadia looks at David with emotion, her eyes filled with tears. David takes his children and they return home, where his wife greets and hugs them. They put their children to bed to rest after reassuring them, then leave the room. David leaves the house and goes out. The next day, David goes to work, and on the way, he listens to the news talking about the incident and the terrorist operation. After he arrives at work, his boss offers him a vacation if he likes, because he went through difficult circumstances on the train, and thanks him for his effort in saving the situation. However, David thanks her and tells her that he is fine and can continue working. His boss offers him a new position as a personal bodyguard to the Home Secretary, explaining that this is a way of thanking him for his effort and intelligence in handling the situation. David goes online to search for information about the Home Secretary named Julia. Then he goes to change his clothes to prepare for work. We notice strong scars and deformations on his back. As soon as he arrives at the minister's headquarters, a woman introduces him to the place and tells him that the minister's driver's name is Terry and the personal guard's name is Tom. As soon as the minister arrives, David greets her and introduces himself, and he suggests that they use an underground tunnel to enter the ministry building. But Julia does not respond to him and walks away, telling her assistant that she likes people to see her in public. David spends the whole day focusing on every detail of the place while standing guarding the minister in her office. At the end of the day, he drives her home with the driver and asks Terry to change the usual route they take. Julia refuses, telling him that it complicates things for her. David responds that his mission is to protect her. After they arrive home, David enters before her to secure the place, and Julia feels uncomfortable and suffocated by him, telling him that she is expecting a friend. But David assures her that he is just doing his job and does not mean to bother her. Later, Julia learns from the report she is reading on her desk that David is the police police officer who managed to save the train from a terrorist operation, and her attitude towards him changes. She apologizes for her initial behavior. The doorbell rings and David opens it to a person named Rob McDonald. Julia introduces David to Rob, who leaves the house after ensuring it is well secured. David returns home and calls his wife, Vicky, on the phone, who seems to be upset with him. He pleads with her to listen, but Vicky refuses to talk and hangs up the phone, leaving David very frustrated. The next day, he takes Julia to a studio for a television interview. He stands in front of her, vigilantly scanning the area until she goes on air. However, her assistant accidentally spills coffee on her, and David decides to give her his shirt and jacket to wear before she goes on air, as there is no time to change. Throughout the interview, David remains highly focused on the environment and every movement around them. Afterwards, there is a big problem when the assistant finds out she has been replaced by someone else. She yells and causes a big scene, prompting David to come down, take her, and escort her out of the building. Julia then exits the building, and David follows her to ensure her safety. Julia gets into an argument with someone from the ministry, and David urges her to go back inside the building because standing in the street is unsafe. Julia refuses to listen and continues to argue. David then drives her home, where Julia returns his shirt and thanks him. They start to talk, and she tells him that the terrorist caught on the train is going to be executed. She asks about his family, and he tells her that he is married with 2 children. He asks if she always dreamed of being a politician, and Julia reveals that she was a criminal lawyer and decided to enter politics to address the inadequacies she found in the law. David returns home and spends the entire night thinking about Vicky while holding the phone, unable to call her. The next morning, before going to work, he stops by her house and pleads with her to talk. He asks about their children, and she tells him they stayed overnight at their friends and asks him to call before coming to see them next time. She informs him that she is involved with someone else, which infuriates David. She tells him that he needs treatment and support, always opposing his dangerous job, which affects his nerves and mental health. However, David tells her that he needs the job to support them and himself, and if they remained married and something happened to him, she would be able to claim compensation from his job. He leaves her and walks out, sad after learning that she is with someone else. On the other hand, Chanel, Julia's assistant, decides to seek revenge. She speaks to a journalist and meets her to provide secrets about Julia, but the journalist demands evidence to support her claims. Otherwise, the story would seem like a disgruntled assistant trying to take revenge. Before she leaves, the journalist asks Chanel to get in touch if she finds any concrete evidence against Julia. David goes to the Veterans Association and meets a friend he had fought with in a country while they were in the army. He tells him that he is now working in security for a minister, and his friend is surprised, asking him how he can protect one of those who sent them to war to watch their friends get killed in front of them. David is moved by his friend's words. The next day, he takes his children to school and finds that his son refuses to enter because his classmates are mocking him. David instructs him to be brave and strong, not to show weakness, and to confront them. The boy reluctantly goes inside, upset. Afterwards, David goes to work. Vicky calls him, but he refuses to answer, though she keeps calling. Julia asks him to answer. Vicky then tells David that the school refuses to let their son Charlie continue there and asks them to transfer him, and they have a year to find another school. David tells her that he is at work and can't do anything right now, but will call her later. Julia arrives at work and meets with someone who provides her with information about a potential terrorist operation on a school. They discover it is the same school where David's children are, and that the operation might be an act of retaliation against David, who prevented the first terrorist operation on the train. Julia requests that the matter be kept secret and that necessary precautions be taken to protect the school and those inside it. Then Julia enters a meeting with all the officials responsible for counterterrorism, and David stands outside the meeting room, focusing on the discussions. After work, David returns home and talks to his wife, asking to check on the children. She begs him not to bring up the school with them. David greets the children, and then he asks his wife if they could meet with the principal to try changing his mind, but she tells him that they have tried many times and nothing has changed. The next day, the counterterrorism support unit reveals that they have found suspicious WhatsApp messages. They tracked them back to the terrorists, and now they are monitoring them. A group of specialized counterterrorism police follows the suspects until they receive orders to attack a vehicle suspected of carrying explosives, which stops near the school. The children are moved away from it, but the vehicle explodes, killing 2 police officers in the process. The report reaches Julia, who is upset when she hears the news and has to leave for a meeting with the Prime Minister. She tells David that there was a terrorist attack near his children's school and that nobody was hurt, but he should call his wife and check on them. David thanks her for the information, and his wife and children are moved to another house because they are in danger and under threat after the recent operation. David wonders how the terrorists knew who the police officer was that thwarted the terrorist operation and who leaked the information. A specialized police officer tells him that they are conducting investigations to find answers to these questions and that all they can do now is take precautions. David is dismissed from his job because his presence poses a risk to the minister and her team. This deeply frustrates David, and he argues with his boss, insisting that what happened was not his fault. He leaves the office angrily and goes to check on his wife and children. His wife tells him that their children are terrified, and she believes the recent attack was a response to the thwarted terrorist operation on the train. David gets upset with his wife when she refuses to continue the discussion, pointing out that their children could have been victims in such an incident. David then meets a friend at a cafe, and they watch a television broadcast featuring Julia giving a speech. His friend comments that she is exploiting the situation to gain more power, just like any cursed politician who sends people to wars to get killed while the officials never suffer or understand the cost. It's always the warriors and their families who pay the price. Meanwhile, Julia is in a meeting with specialists who suggest there might have been an internal leak about the train attack, or someone who witnessed the incident leaked the information. They speculate that either a third member of the terrorist organization who wasn't captured relayed all the information to the organization, leading to the second operation at the school. The intelligence chief criticizes Julia, the home secretary, and her police force for negligence. Julia defends herself in the meeting, particularly upset about the dismissal of David, her personal guard, arguing that she is always in danger by nature. She leaves the meeting agitated and returns to her office. Later, David receives a letter stating that his children have been accepted into a new school, which surprises him, and his wife is very happy. David also learns that he has been reinstated in his job at the home office. His boss suggests that his strong connections with influential people there might have facilitated his easy return. David is puzzled by all these events, but Julia welcomes him back warmly, revealing that she was instrumental in his reinstatement. After work, Julia goes to dine at a restaurant, with David discreetly securing the area. Julia decides to leave the restaurant and asks David to get food from anywhere. They go to her house to eat and talk. Julia learns from David that he is separated from his wife, but not divorced, maintaining a good relationship for their children's sake. Julia is surprised as she thought they were amicable. She shares that her own relationship with her ex-husband was very bad, which is why she did not expect David to be separated like her. David thanks Julia for helping his children get into the school. Julia tells him that she entered politics to help people. David then enters an investigation due to an incident involving the shooting of the minister. They ask him for more information than he wrote in the report, and he tells them that he has mentioned everything in the report and there is nothing new to add. They show him a photo of him with the sniper standing and talking, so he tells them that he was trying to make him surrender, but he refused. They are surprised that the sniper didn't kill him, and David tells them that his weapon was empty and the security vehicles had arrived and he knew his end was near, so he decided to kill himself because he had no chance to escape. The investigation concludes. David goes to Julia and tries to find out the truth, whether she really knew about the attack on his son's school, but Julia refuses to say anything and tells him that she is tired and needs to sleep. David continues to observe Julia's secret meetings in her room and listens from behind the door to the conversations. Meanwhile, the security agencies try to determine the identity of the sniper and discover that surveillance cameras recorded his arrival at the place at night, meaning he knew about the minister's movements beforehand. They request a list of all the people who knew the minister's movements in advance. The minister, Julia, goes to a meeting with national security where they tell her that there is a problem with the police and that there is a spy among them passing information to the terrorist organization. After the meeting, Julia asks a person named Stephen, whom she often meets away from the office, to talk to him privately, and David continues to watch them from a distance. David enters after her. She confesses that she knew his children's school was targeted, but didn't tell him or anyone else. However, she did send armed vehicles to protect the school, which is why no children were harmed. Julia holds David's hand and pleads with him to stay with her by his own choice, not just because he is her bodyguard. Julia enters the conference and presents her bill, but protesters stand and chant against her. They are removed from the hall, and David remains focused until he notices someone heading towards Julia. He rushes to intercept because he senses something is wrong, and indeed, the place is bombed. David is injured and tries to get up to check on Julia. The media report the incident, and the police receive new information that the laptop used by the sniper who wanted to kill the minister before the bombing was using internet from a cafe in London, leading them to suspect that the perpetrator resides in London. The police continue to investigate all security personnel who secured the conference to find any evidence that could lead them to the criminal. Vicky keeps calling David to check on him, but David refuses to respond. The police watch the incident tape in slow motion after extracting the surveillance camera footage, but cannot determine whether the explosion came from a bag held by one of Julia's assistants, Tahir, or if it was a bomb placed in the hall beforehand. The police search David's residence, take his phone and laptop, and interrogate him. They tell him that they know he left the hall seconds before the explosion. David confirms their statement, explaining that he felt something was off and went out to make sure everything was all right. Tahir was found with files, and he wanted to go behind the podium to give some information to the minister. He searched the bag that was with him, which contained papers, but he did not search Tahir himself because he did not suspect him. During the investigation, David faces the reality that he turned off his phone at a certain moment during the conference. They accuse him of doing so to avoid being tracked, but he defends himself by saying that he did it to preserve the battery that was about to run out. After the investigation, David goes to his wife, who reproaches him for not responding to her. He tells her that the police took his phone and asks her to take care of their children and choose a good new father for them. He then leaves her and goes to the hospital to check on Julia, who had entered surgery and had not yet come out. He sits waiting for her to come out and watches the news. The investigation committee meets and displays a tape showing Tahir and accusing him of being the suspect in the latest crime and linking him to other crimes. They try to find conclusive evidence to prove this. At that time, David sees Julia's family and the doctor coming out of the surgery, informing them of her death. David cries and leaves the hospital, walking in the street sadly. He goes to take a gun he had hidden and decides to commit suicide, but changes his mind at the last moment. He continues to cry and fires the shot away, but it hits part of his head. His wife comes knocking on him. He opens the door for her. She tries to help him with the wound. He lies to her and does not tell her that he tried to commit suicide. His wife tries to take him to the hospital, but David completely refuses. His wife takes him to see their children, and he hugs them while crying. Meanwhile, evidence is presented to the investigators that Rob, Julia's personal assistant, was standing with Tahir before the explosion, and surveillance cameras captured their image together. They investigate Rob and show him a picture with Tahir. He tells them that he was giving him papers related to Julia to deliver them, and that the bag belonged to Tahir, not him. The investigator confronts him with evidence from the telephone company that the last call to Tahir came from his number, and he tells her that he called him to make sure the papers reached the minister because it was important. On the other hand, the investigators ask David to help them in the investigations with the jihadist's wife, who tried to blow up the train because she refuses to cooperate with them, and they hope she would talk to him. Indeed, David enters the investigation and sits down to ask the jihadist's wife, who is very scared and crying. He tries to calm and reassure her and asks her who gave her the explosive belt. She tells him that her husband gave it to her and that he did not make the explosives, and told her it was a gift without saying from whom. Many times he locked her in the house, and when she yelled and raised her voice one day, afraid that the neighbors would hear them, he took her with him in the car to a car park and met someone who gave him something. The investigator distributes many pictures on the table and asks Nadia if the person was one of them, but Nadia does not remember his face. They request a break, and the investigator goes out to thank David for his cooperation with them. David tells the investigator that he was able to find information related to the murder of the minister, that there was a person who once met her in a hotel and erased all the surveillance footage from the hotel. When he reviewed it himself, he found no evidence of his entry or exit, and he is sure that this person is behind the murder of the minister, not Tahir. However, the investigator tells him that this is not her specialty and that she is only investigating matters related to Tahir. Later, the investigator finds out that the explosives were not in the bag and calls David to tell him what she discovered. She tells him that she cannot disclose more information than that. David thanks her, as he was trying by all means to find out who committed this crime. She summons him and asks him to describe the person who visited the minister, and they start to create a sketch on the computer based on the descriptions David provides. The investigations manage to identify David's friend, who blew up his head before the police arrived after he tried to kill the minister the first time. David is distressed that they were able to track him down, but the investigator tells him that this will help them reach those higher up who caused the minister's death in the last incident. They speak with Nadia, the jihadist's wife, again. They show her a sketch of the person David saw in the hotel, and Nadia confirms that it is the same person her husband met. David then learns that the minister was targeted for assassination by national security, and he argues with Sharma, the person in charge of the investigations. He leaves the place and walks away. The investigator tries to calm him down, but David refuses to listen to her and tells her that he will not rest until he knows who is behind Julia's murder. David then listens to the recordings he made for Julia when she was conducting interviews in the hotel room. He goes online from a cafe on the street to search for the information he heard, which leads him to the Minister of the Interior, and he realizes that he is definitely behind the minister's murder. He notices a car following him and hides, taking down its numbers. He tries to access the system from his work device to get its data, but he finds that the data has been blocked. David goes to his boss and the head of investigations and tells them that the minister had received information about disgraceful acts being carried out by the National Security Department. She had taken this information to the Prime Minister. The investigator is surprised that David had kept all this from them, and David tells them that all these disgraceful acts are linked to the Prime Minister. When his boss asks him about the location of the compressed file containing the information, he tells her that it was with the minister and was surely destroyed during the explosion. David then goes to the hospital to ask about what happened after the minister was admitted there. Someone there tells him that her ex-husband, a member of parliament, came and was tense and wanted to know the location of her bag but did not find it and left. David leaves the hospital and goes to a conference by Roger, Julia's ex-husband, and threatens him that if he had any hand in her murder, he would not leave him alone. At that time, a representative from the police goes to the National Security and asks them to allow the police to investigate their employees to find out if any of them were indeed involved in the murder of the minister, especially since someone had gone to the minister in a hotel and erased all the camera records that could reveal his image. But the National Security completely refuses. David meets Rob, who was leaving his house and heading to work, and confronts him with the truth he had discovered. He tells him that he did not attend the conference because he knew what was going to happen and had planned for it, making Taher the scapegoat there. He asks him to confess, threatens him, and indeed goes with him to the police where he gives a statement. He says that he was cooperating with Roger, Julia's ex-husband, and Travis, a high-ranking government official who believed Julia was planning to become the Prime Minister and were trying to remove and stop her. However, Rob assures that he did not intend to harm her and that all he did was write mistakes in her speech that she was going to present to cause her embarrassment in front of the camera and the audience. He sent Taher with the modifications to the stage and claims he had nothing to do with the explosion that occurred. David believes him, and at that time, Roger and his associates plan to kidnap David's family and threaten him. David's boss requests a meeting with him after accusations reached her that he was involved with Minister Julia, and they were recorded with sound. David then realizes that he is on the right track and that National Security did this to stop him. His boss asks him to take leave until she can handle and resolve this issue, but David refuses, saying that this is what they want. David goes to his wife, who tells him that a person had come asking her about the minister and shows her a picture. She tells him that it is the same person, and David then knows that he is from National Security and is the same person who met the minister in the hotel. He returns to the police and meets with investigator Lewis, asking for her help to continue his journey and find out who is behind Julia's murder. He requests her to review the cameras at the place where his wife works because the killer visited her. Lewis returns and tells him that, as usual, they managed to cover their tracks and erase the information from the camera. She tells him that National Security visited his wife's house and searched it, and they definitely searched his house too. Lewis asks him if he knows the location of Julia's laptop, which disappeared from her house and has not been found since the incident. David confirms that he knows nothing about it. David meets Julia's former assistant, Chanel, who was coincidentally fired in a cafe. She greets him and tells him that she was sad about Julia's death despite the problems that occurred. She gives him her new number, and he gives her his. She takes her coffee and leaves to get into a car with a driver. David photographs them and zooms in on the photo to see the driver's face and sends it to Lewis, who tells him that the driver is a professional killer in a terrorist organization. David worries because this is the same car that Chanel got into when she left her job. David is summoned, and his boss tells him that a report about his mental health has reached her, stating that he attempted to kill himself. Therefore, she is giving him an indefinite leave and withdrawing his gun permit. She forces him to see a psychiatrist, apologizes to him, and tells him that it is for his own good. David calls Lewis after leaving and yells at her, telling her that she deceived him because he trusted her and confided in her about his suicide attempt, but she betrayed him. However, Lewis does not understand what he is talking about, and he hangs up on her. David then goes to Julia's house, searches it, and manages to find a CD hidden behind a picture on her desk. He takes it and leaves. David hides the CD and takes a gun that he had hid, loading it with bullets. He goes to meet Chanel, who hands him over to her boss, who turns out to be part of an international terrorist gang, and they kidnap David. Lewis discovers that David had served in the army with the sniper who killed himself, and that he had entered Julia's house at night with the cameras recording him. David is then accused of murdering Julia, and full patrols are sent out to search for him. When David regains consciousness, he finds himself wearing an explosive belt and thrown in a dilapidated place in a basement. Meanwhile, Lewis goes to David's wife and asks about him. She tells her that he deceived her and then that she must tell them his location if she knows it. David's wife, Vicky, mentions that the last time she saw him, he said a strange phrase, "before it's too late," but she didn't understand its meaning. At that time, David emerges wrapped in a sheet, looking very disheveled, and asks a woman on the street to lend him her phone to call the police. He identifies himself and reports an emergency, giving them the street name where he is standing. Full units arrive along with his wife, his boss, and Lewis. They ask him to raise his hands and find him wearing the explosive belt. He tries to explain that he is cooperating with them, and they try to move him away from the building he is standing in front of. Lewis leaves a walkie-talkie on the ground, which David cautiously picks up. His boss speaks to him through it, telling him that they want to end this
matter without any loss of life. They ask him to surrender, and he tells them that he tried to remove the explosive belt but couldn't.
He fainted, and when he woke up, he found himself with the belt on. His boss appears to not believe him and leaves the place, walking away. David tries to convince Lewis that he is being framed and that the people who killed Julia
Are also trying to set him up, explaining that all that happened was orchestrated by an international terrorist organization in collaboration with national security. He tells them everything that happened with Chanel. He informs them that the proof of his innocence and the CD are hidden in his house under the sink. He asks them to jam the transmission device because national security personnel are surely listening, and this indeed happens. The head of national security orders his men to storm David's house, but the police arrive just in time. David asks to speak with his wife, Vicky, and apologizes for not being the right husband, mentioning that he returned different from the war. Vicky begs the police to help him. A specialist arrives to disarm the explosive belt, but it turns out to be very complex, similar to the one placed on the train, and there is a possibility it could explode. An order to retreat is issued, and David begs them not to kill him, asserting his innocence. His wife rushes to him, refusing to leave him. David decides to prove his innocence himself and walks towards his house amid television cameras recording the event. The area where David lives is completely evacuated, and David asks Vicky to dig up the ground in the garden where she unearths the evidence. David then requests the police to send a robot to assist him in disarming the explosive belt himself. Vicky is to send them the evidence. David begins to disconnect the wire himself after receiving instructions from the specialist through the robot's screen, and he asks everyone present to move as far away as possible in case the belt explodes to ensure no one else is harmed. David successfully disarms the explosive belt and quickly escapes. He goes to Chanel's house, surprising her when she finds him behind her after she returns home and steps out onto the balcony. He asks for her cooperation and threatens her, then takes her in his car. She leads him to the house of his boss, who turns out to be part of the gang and had leaked all the information. Her involvement in Julia's murder is proven, and David hands her over to the police for investigation. David's boss confesses to everything and thanks David for his efforts in uncovering the details of the case. David decides to start a new chapter, goes to a psychologist to treat the effects of the trauma he experienced. He reconciles with his wife and children and takes them on a vacation to start their lives anew.